As much as editors should be thinking about serving their readership and community, it is also about personal taste.
This is Writer's Mosaic in Conversation. Gabriel Gbadamosi talks to Jasmine Richards about the reasons for her starting up Storymix for young adults and children's literature.
So, Jasmine Richards, entrepreneur, editor, screenwriter, and author, and founder of Storymix, the equivalent of a Hollywood film studio for producing diverse children's and young adult literature. Welcome and thank you for speaking with me, Gabriel Gbadamosi, for Writer's Mosaic.
Hi.
Can I ask, what took you into the area of literature and specifically writing for children?
Oh, okay. We're going to have to go way back. I think looking at my years up until this point right now, which at some point in my 40s, okay, I'm not going to say exactly where I am in my 40s, but books have been fundamental to taking me to places that I never would have imagined, achieving things that really on paper would have seemed out of reach for a child with my set of circumstances. So I grew up in Haringey in the 80s, young single parent, my mother did a wonderful job, but was young. We didn't have lots of money, but we lived very close to Stroud Green Library. And I don't know if you've ever read the book Outliers by Malcolm Gladwell. What I love about that book is he talks about a few things. So he talks about how many hours you need to become an expert in something. So
10,000.
10,000 hours. And he also talks about proximity, right? So he talks about Bill Gates, and that Bill Gates was had proximity to a computer in the 70s.
He had access.
That's right. He had access. And I think there were only 3 high schools in the US or something that had these massive computers. And Bill Gates just so happened to be at one of them. And when I read that, in a smaller scale way for sure, but the fact that I lived in a block of flats that was 2 minutes away from Stroud Green Library, and that's 2 minutes with little legs, right? And I spent so much time in that library. And I read so much in that library. And there's no way that my mother could have afforded the number of books that I got through in a week. And then also, I think in a pragmatic way for my mum, the library was free childcare, right? So I spent a lot of time. So I got those 10,000 hours of reading kids' fiction in incredibly early. And that love of reading, took me from social housing, took me on to Oxford University to study English, and then into working in publishing.
Fantastic. You do actually say, and it's a lovely kind of formulation for it, that reading for pleasure is the magic pill for social mobility, and every child deserves access to that. You began as an editor as well as an author. What were the difficulties within children's and young adult publishing that you encountered that made you think, there need to be systemic or structural changes?
Goodness. So, I think the thing to say is that for many years, I was just working in the industry. And it was only in 2020 that I actually really sat down and sat with this and thought about it.
The pandemic. It gave everyone time.
And then also we had the murder of George Floyd in 2020. These two things together, I think, really got me thinking about my career in publishing. And that for a lot of it, because I was just focused on climbing the ladder, right? Becoming a senior editorial force, I suppose. There was definitely stuff that I was privy to or heard where I didn't speak up because it was easier not to. And all of that came home to roost, really, when my son was 5 years old and I was looking at the bookshelves. We were in Waterstones. Other bookshops are available for you to stand in and look at books. And I was looking at the shelves and I couldn't see a book in the kids section that centered a child that looked like my child. So I had this 5-year-old, real bookworm. We were moving from picture books to chapter books. Could not see him in any of those books. But I couldn't do what many people have done when they started businesses around this sort of conversation around diversity in kids' books, and be angry at the industry for not serving all children. Because I'd worked in this industry for 15 years at this point. Lots of these books on this shelf I'd actually written. I might have ghostwritten them, or edited, or commissioned.
You'd had a hand.
I had a hand. And now I was looking
An
at the shelf.
hand.
An invisible hand. And now I was looking at these books and I couldn't see a character that looked like my son. And so I had a real moment of anger. And it was at the industry that I love. I love publishing. I love books, right?
Was it also at yourself?
Oh, 100%. 100%. I have to take responsibility for the part I had in allowing for there to be a bookshelf just in in central London, like one of the most multicultural places in the world, and that shelf to look like that. I had a role to play in that.
Tell us how you untangled that to begin your activism.
Yeah, so very quickly I got to a very pragmatic point of view about how was I going to change the shelf. So I had a few routes. So I could continue as an author as my side hustle, if you like. So continue to work in-house in publishing and write books on the side. But I was already finding that juggle between being a parent, working in-house, or even as a freelance editor, and writing quite difficult. Or I could take all this experience that I had accumulated over the last 15 years around IP development, and IP stands for intellectual property. So it's like one of the strands of my career where I would ideate and commission and edit and get books on shelves quickly. And this is where sometimes I feel slightly Machiavellian, because, and for some of your listeners and the pure of heart writers, this is going to sound horrible. But you've got to remember, I've worked in the belly of the beast, okay?
Yes.
And as much as editors should be thinking about serving their readership and community, it is also about personal taste. So I sat with all of this and I thought, okay, so I am going to come up with ideas that I know I can sell to publishers. So I'm thinking about the commissioning editor. And that commissioning editor, I know exactly who she is. So I'm talking about kids fiction in particular. I know exactly who she is. I know what newspaper she reads. She reads The Guardian, right? She reads The Guardian. She might live in South London, but the nice ends. All right. I know her because I've actually come up through publishing with her. We started at the same time in publishing. So I know that she is also frustrated by the lack of diversity and inclusion on our shelves. But when stuff comes across her desk, it doesn't always have the obvious commercial hook. So I know who she is. So I'm thinking, right, I'm going to create ideas that I know that she can take into an acquisition meeting and convince the finance guy. And I say guy deliberately because it's always a finance guy. I'm serving them, and then I'm also going to serve my son and other kids like him who aren't getting to see themselves. And I'm going to thread that needle. So I'm going to come up with ideas that are going to serve both those purposes. So I would have some ideas which I know would just sell to a publishing house and are not serving my community. And there's other ideas that I know would serve my community, but I could not get through an acquisition meeting. That is where I started, knowing that that was going to be my strategy so I could get books on the shelves as quickly as possible and have a really high success rate.
This year, in 2024, your organisation, which has, as it were, enacted your project, Storymix, was awarded a Deutsche Bank Award for creative entrepreneurs. And that in partnership with an organisation, MeWe 360, which really supports Black and minority ethnic, as they used to be called, and perhaps in some places still are, creative entrepreneurs. The UK government's own statistics are that 30% of all UK school children,
It's 33, I think.
There we go. It's rising. A non-white British.
Yeah.
Rising to 67% in London.
We are telling stories from the point of view of characters that don't get to take up space in kids' narratives, right? So we're telling stories of, I'll give you an example. So Future Hero, which is a project that I sold to Scholastic, tells the story of Jarrell. And he goes to the barbershop and he gets his hair cut. He gets a symbol cut into his hair. And that symbol takes him through the barbershop mirror into an Afrofuturistic world where he discovers that he is the hero that they've been waiting for, right? To take on a sorcerer called Ikala, and to save both the world of Ulfrica and our world here, Earthside. And now the reason I wanted to tell that story is because I kept on reading articles in the newspaper about young Black boys being excluded from school because of their haircuts, okay? And that annoyed me. So I was like, okay, how do I take something that feels traumatic, okay, and put a lens on it where I get to make that young Black boy a hero? And I was also been fascinated for many years because my younger brother, 8 years younger than me, I would often take him to the barbershop, and the barbershop being a place where you learn and where when you come out, you're actually transformed. So that idea of transformation is really interesting to me as well. Okay, I've taken real lived experience, cultural experience, and centered it in a story that is fantasy and adventure, and they're sort of fighting creatures, and it's hero's journey.
How did you get
for
this,
7 to 9 year olds?
How did you get this Afrofuturist, Afro-alterist story through him, the finance director of Scholastic?
Because I gave the tools to the commissioning editor that she could be able to talk about that book just in terms of a hero's journey, fantasy adventure series. And also it had an amazing, if I do say so myself, pitch, because I pitched it as Black Panther meets Beast Quest. So Beast Quest is a series that sold millions of copies in the UK and follows a pattern in terms of main character who's called Tom going on an adventure, fighting beasts, very short chapters, very dynamic plot. So when I say Beast Quest to someone in publishing, they're like, oh, I know exactly what type of book that is. Even if I tried to pitch that 5 years earlier, I wouldn't have had that point of reference. But I had 2 brilliant pieces of popular culture that I could use. Black Panther meets Beast Quest. And we had a 10-way auction for that series. That doesn't happen for books for 7 to 9 year olds. That's not supposed to happen.
You earlier in your long working life through organizations like Penguin and so on, found yourself organizing something called Bookbound, which was literally about writer development. Could you tell me something about that initiative project, what you learned from it and how you applied that to Storymix?
I learned so many things from Bookbound. I actually started it with 3 other friends who all worked in publishing as editors and were also authors, and we sort of felt frustrated about the type of writer education and training that was available. I also learned how easy it is not to make any money with a business, and so I made some mistakes with that business that I haven't made with Storymix. But that whole idea of nurture is kind of key to Storymix, because actually when I was sitting with the business idea of Storymix, my first instinct was, okay, if I want to change the shelf really quickly, who are all the writers that I know already who I've acquired or published and could write these books really quickly for me? And they were obviously white writers, okay? So then I sat with that, and then I was like, well, that's not going to work. That's not what I want to do, because I'm not just changing what's on the shelf. It's like when I go to all these publishing events and it's just me and Mallory Blackman, I want to change who's in the room as well. So then I was like, okay, it's going to be Black and brown writers. But actually, because that door has felt quite shut for a long time, it's not like it's not like my networks were awash with Black and brown writers. And so there's definitely been a sense of offering training, free workshops, working with writers and saying, okay, you've got a brilliant voice, but we're going to work together on the plot. Okay. And we're going to work together to really think about our endings of chapters. We're trying to keep a 9-year-old's attention, right? So we're really focused on who that reader is and how we're going to make this story as impactful as possible. So taking all of that, and I did literally take a lot of material from Bookbound in terms of the teaching that we did at Bookbound and use that in nurturing writers at Storymix.
Can I ask you that bit after Storymix has been successful in selling a kind of 500,000 or 3 million sort of strand of books? What do you do? And what is the possibility of them actually having careers after Storymix?
Well, I would actually say it's been quite successful so far. But we've been going for 5 years, and during those 5 years, we've had some big sort of seismic changes in terms of society. So we've had COVID, we had the whole Black Lives Matter movement. So I'm still trying to get a fix on what actually publishing really looks like. Because 2024 looks very different to how things looked in early 2021. And I sometimes joke, although I don't think it's that funny, but I sometimes joke that in early 2021, I could have sneezed on a handkerchief and I think Storymix could have sold something at that point. Because publishing was so focused on buying books that centered Black characters by Black creatives. And if you think about who was at the top of the bookseller charts at that point, so we had Bernardine Evaristo, Renaud Lodge on the non-fiction side. So let's not get it twisted, right? Publishing was interested in Black talent because it was also selling bucket loads. Okay. So off the back of writers working with Storymix, writers have gone on to have their own careers. And if you think most writers get signed up for 2 books or so, what I'm interested to know is what happens now.
Yes.
And I don't know the answer yet, but I am worried that the agenda has changed and there does not seem to be the same urgency around diversifying those bookshelves. Part of the reason I applied for that DBASE award,
the Deutsche Bank award for creative entrepreneurs,
where I won 15,000 English pounds, right? The reason why I did that is because things have been slower for Storymix. And I am thinking about how do we make sure we're here for another 5 years. And I came to a realization that the model of selling license to our IP is a good model, solid model. It's a model that's been around since the 1950s, actually. So things like Goosebumps and Nancy Drew and all of these things are all packaged fiction. Okay.
For people who don't know, IP, intellectual property.
Right? So that works. Vampire Diaries, actually Gossip Girl, all of these things were developed by a group of people who hired a writer, and those books have gone on to sell many, many hundreds of thousands. So that model works. But what I've realised in 2024, when I'm pitching brilliant projects, and they really are brilliant projects, and I'm not placing them, is that I cannot sit here and wait for publishing to secure Storymix's future. Like, I have got to take action. So I applied for that award. And the reason why I won that award is because I spoke to them really honestly about the challenges that we face in 2024. And that Storymix will also need to become a micro publisher, something that I said I would never do, right? I said I'd never become a publisher because it's so hard to make any money. And I'm really not interested in the cost of paper or how I'm going to transport books, right? That's not what I'm creative, not great with numbers. I know what my jam is. It's not that, but I cannot sit here and not do something. And we do have a little bit of cushion because of that success. We just so happen to be a kids IP company that centered Black and brown kids at the point when, and that's what publishing wanted desperately. How often does that happen to a business, that you have exactly the thing? And I wasn't trying to catch up. We were already doing it. And it's like, what have you got? Well, I actually have these 8 projects. Oh, you want to buy all 8? Brilliant, let's go. Okay. But that's not where we are in 24. So I'm going to have to innovate. My team are going to have to come on this trip with me, and they are, because they're brilliant. And we are going to publish. And we are going to try and reach those communities that are apparently hard to reach. So I'm doing the little bunny ear things, like hard to reach communities. That's what they talk about in publishing. And I don't believe they are hard to reach. Okay. I just don't think that publishers know how to serve them. And I can say this in keynotes. I can say this on panels, but I think I'm just going to have to walk the walk and show it. So that's my little bit of action that I can do.
What thought in your long career, not only within Storymix, have you given to the very structure of children and young adult storytelling in this culture?
I think responsible publishing would have a range. I think you need to have... So I say that our books do not centre Black or brown trauma. Okay? Doesn't mean we can't get into difficult conversations. So one of our titles, the Lizzie and Belle Mysteries, is 2 young Black women in Georgian England solving mysteries. Okay? I worked with a wonderful writer called Joanna on that. And because she's a historian, she's like, that's a great conceit. Wonderful. But you do understand that Black people were being snatched off the street in the 1700s and being sold into slavery or back into slavery if they'd emancipated themselves. And I was like, I didn't know that. So I didn't know that. I did know about these real life Black British figures, Dido Bell. I knew about Ignatius Sancho. So Lizzie Sancho is our other main character here. And so we talk about the truth of that. So they need to solve this mystery. They need to get clues. They also need to be watching their back.
Of course.
Right? They need to. So
still do.
So children's books, even though they're for children, you can talk about this stuff.
Yes.
You know, and you need to, and it's important. So there needs to be a range. But in terms of what we do specifically at Storymix, I feel like there was an over-representation when it came to fiction with Black children that focused on trauma or history and trauma. So the only narratives, the first time I saw a Black character in a book was Roll of Thunder, Hear My Cry. Right. Wonderful book.
Yes.
But imagine that being the first time you see yourself in a book.
How old were you?
I think I was 12 or 13. That's the first time I ever saw myself. So I'd catch glimpses of my personality, maybe in Pippi Longstocking or in Anne of Green Gables. I was like, oh, there's things about this character that makes me think of me, but I didn't see myself. First time I saw myself, I remember the picture of, she had 2 little pigtails, and I think there was a burning cross behind her. And that's the first time I get to see myself. So that book needed to exist, should exist, but it shouldn't be the only time I get to see myself in a kid's book. So in terms of the space Storymix takes up, I am centered on stories of joy as the antithesis of what other books are out there historically.
I got
feature
you.
Black kids.
I got you. Is there ever going to be a possibility that Storymix will leave open another door amongst its many doors to invite in creatives? One which says, why don't you pitch to us your story, your idea? And we as a micro publisher will help you take it to publication.
I would love to get there. I would love to get there, but I need to feel more financially secure before I do that. Because the thing about opening the doors and inviting all the submissions is that takes women power, manpower to read those books and respond, to do it in a respectful, kind way. At the moment, it's not very respectful, kind, that process. So if I was going to do it, I'd want to do it properly.
Yes.
Right, you'd want to go back, probably want to go back with some editorial feedback, even if I wasn't acquiring it. All of that is cost.
Yes.
I'm not financially secure enough to do that in the way that I would like to. And I still feel like I've got to trust my instincts, having worked in this industry for 20 years, that I can thread that needle, right? So I hope we can get there. We need to get some big wins before we can.
Can you think about all those people who might be listening to you now, who want to write books for children, want to write young adult fiction, want to be illustrators in this sector? What advice can you give them?
I don't know why I took in such a deep breath. Oh my goodness. What advice could I give them? Okay, so the first bit of advice I'm going to give them, if you actually want to write for kids and teens, please, please, please read currently. So the number of times I've met writers and like, we're writing for kids, I'm like, brilliant. What was the last kids book that you read? Oh, I love Roald Dahl, or another book that's maybe from 40 years ago. And it's like, have you read anything that was published in the last 18 months? Right?
Mm-hmm.
It's absolutely key. In the same way, and writers, you might not want to hear this, but in the same way music has changed, right? So now how long are songs now? 2 minutes?
Three,
2.5 minutes or something?
Oh, well, 3.
Right, maybe 3.
Mm-hmm.
And where the chorus comes, like they actually looked at how the structures of songs
The bridge,
changed.
take it to the bridge.
Right? And I think there is a similar, if you look at books written 30 years ago compared to books now, you need to get to the meat of the action so much faster. And I'm not going to talk about attention spans. It's not about attention spans. It's about actually the currency of their interest. If you think about, it's not that they can't read for long periods of time. It's that you're up against Roblox and you're up against Netflix and Amazon Prime and BBC iPlayer and a myriad of other things that can take their attention. So if you want them to choose you and your story over a story that they might be getting from
your
Roblox,
magic must be powerful.
It must be.
Yeah, it must
And-
be on
and
the
please-
first page.
And please just get us into the action. Okay?
Right, yeah.
So read currently, because I think you'll be surprised if you haven't read a kid's book. If you're saying you want to write a kid's book and you haven't read anything from the last 5 years, 18 months, you're going to be surprised.
Do you have a current favourite book?
Oh, I read recently a great book, Kofi and the Battle of the Bands by Jeffrey Boyacha, which was brilliant.
Thank you for speaking with Writers Mosaic, and really good luck in, as they used to say at school, your future endeavours.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
Jasmine Richards was in conversation with Gabriel Gbadamosi. To hear more writers, go to writersmosaic.org.uk.